There's a silence that happens when a phone call ends before you're ready for it to. Vanessa Grant knew that silence. Standing outside the locked gate of a house that used to be hers, phone dead in her hand, after hearing her husband's voice for the first time in months. 6 years ago, she had it all: a husband, 2 kids, a life everyone envied. She gave it away one small decision at a time, and it started with something she thought would barely matter. She has no idea, standing at that gate, just how much it did. Before we jump back into the story, take a second to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our new stories every week. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. Now, back to the story. Before any of this, Elias and Vanessa Grant were the couple everyone in their circle quietly envied. They'd met at Clark, Atlanta, married 3 years after graduation, and by the time they had Micah and then Skylar, they'd built the kind of life people put on Christmas cards: a brick house in a good school district, Elias climbing steadily at a logistics company downtown, Vanessa 2 years into a marketing job she actually liked. Elias drove her to work every morning in his gray Denali, always early enough to get her coffee first. Friday nights were sacred. Dinner, sometimes dancing, always home in time to relieve the sitter and fall asleep tangled together on the couch. It wasn't a perfect marriage. Vanessa would tell you later, if you asked her honestly, that even before the accident there had been a low hum of dissatisfaction in her. A feeling that her life had narrowed the moment the kids were born, that somewhere along the way she'd stopped being anyone's first choice and started being everyone's default caretaker. She loved Elias, but love, by then, had started sharing space with something quieter and more dangerous: resentment she hadn't said out loud to anyone, including herself. Then came a Thursday in October. Elias was driving home from a late supplier meeting on I-285 when a tractor-trailer clipped his lane and sent the Denali into the median at 60 miles an hour. He was cut out of the wreckage unconscious. Vanessa got the call at 9:40 p.m. and doesn't remember the drive to Grady Memorial at all. Only the fluorescent lights of the ICU waiting room, and a trauma surgeon telling her, in the gentlest voice a stranger has ever used on her, that Elias's spinal cord had been severed at T10. He would live. He would very likely never walk again. Vanessa sat with that sentence the way you sit with a stone in your shoe on a long walk, aware of it every single step, unable to stop and take it out. The Denali was totaled. The Grants were down to one car, the one Vanessa now used to get Micah and Skylar to school and herself to work, because someone had to be the one still standing. Elias came home from 6 weeks of inpatient rehab in a wheelchair, dependent on his wife for things no husband ever wants to need help with: bathing, dressing, the most basic dignities of a body he no longer fully controlled. Vanessa loved him. She told herself that every single day, like a passphrase, because some mornings it was the only thing keeping her in the house at all. 14 months after the accident, Vanessa ran into Prestondale at a Kroger on Memorial Drive. She hadn't seen him since college. Preston had liked her back then, quietly and persistently, in the way of a man who never got a real answer and never quite let the question go. He asked about Elias the way people do when they've heard secondhand that something happened but don't know the shape of it. When Vanessa told him, wheelchair, full-time care, hasn't worked in over a year, something in Preston's expression softened in a way that, months later, she would recognize as the exact moment he decided she was available again. He started texting. Nothing improper at first, a joke, thinking of you kind of text, let me know if you ever need to talk kind of text. Then it became coffee. Then it became Vanessa finding reasons to be near the Kroger on Memorial Drive at the same time every week. She told herself it was harmless. She told herself, with the particular conviction of someone building an excuse brick by brick, that she had earned this. A corner of her life that didn't smell like antiseptic wipes and hospital-grade lotion, that didn't require her to manage anyone's body but her own. What Vanessa didn't notice, what she was too tired, too resentful, too quietly furious at the life she hadn't chosen to notice, was how carefully Preston was positioning himself. He never pushed. He never asked her to leave Elias outright. He simply made himself the easiest, softest place available, and waited for Vanessa to walk toward it on her own. And one night, over a second glass of wine she hadn't planned on having, he made a suggestion that sounded, on the surface, like the kindest thing anyone had said to her in over a year. You need help, Vanessa. Real help. Hire someone. You deserve to have a life too. She didn't argue. She didn't even hesitate the way she should have. Within 3 weeks, Vanessa had placed an ad for a live-in home health aide and hired the first woman who walked through her door with a folder of references and a steady, unbothered voice. Her name was Josephine Marsh. Everyone called her Josie. Josie was 36, soft-spoken, the kind of caregiver who wrote down every medication time without being asked twice and never once made Elias feel like a burden in his own house. She'd spent 8 years doing home care in and around Atlanta and had seen every version of a family quietly falling apart around a hospital bed in the living room. She didn't judge the Grants. She simply worked, competently and without complaint, moving through the house like she'd always belonged in it. With Josie there, Vanessa stopped coming home most nights at all. At first it was one late night with Preston, easily explained away. Then 2 nights a week. Then most of them. Josie covered for her without ever being asked to. Not out of loyalty to Vanessa, but because someone had to get Micah and Skylar dressed and fed and out the door for school, and someone had to keep Elias comfortable, medicated, turned in his bed so he wouldn't develop pressure sores. She talked to him. Really talked. Not the clipped, guilty exchanges Vanessa still managed on the rare nights she bothered to come home. Elias found himself, almost against his will, looking forward to those conversations more than he wanted to admit. Then came the Saturday Josie almost didn't go back. It was her day off, her first full one in weeks, and she had plans. But something sat wrong in her chest all afternoon, a pull she couldn't explain and didn't try to argue with. She drove back to the house near dinner time with no real reason except a feeling she couldn't shake. What she found stopped her in the doorway. Micah and Skylar were alone in the den, the TV on low, a bag of chips split between them for dinner because nothing else had been made. Elias was in his chair by the window, unwashed since morning, his color off, his jaw tight in the specific, silent way of a man who has learned that anger changes nothing when your body won't cooperate with it. Vanessa's car wasn't in the driveway. It hadn't been since the night before. Josie didn't ask questions. She fed the children. She cleaned Elias up, checked his vitals, and got the house back into some kind of order. And when she was finally getting ready to leave for the night, Elias called her name. He asked her, hesitant, in the voice of a man asking for something he wasn't sure he had the right to ask for anymore, whether she would consider moving in full-time. Not shifts. Living there, in the guest room down the hall, available to the children in a way their own mother currently wasn't. Josie hesitated. She told him she didn't want to cause trouble in his marriage. Elias told her he would talk to Vanessa himself. He did. And Vanessa, rather than hearing the request for what it actually was, a house quietly begging someone to hold it together, heard only what she wanted to hear. More coverage meant more freedom for her. She agreed almost before he finished the sentence, already halfway out the door to meet Preston. The next day, Josie packed a bag and moved into the room down the hall from 2 children who were already, without either adult fully realizing it, starting to think of her as the one who stayed. Here is where most people watching this assume they know where the story goes. A lonely, neglected husband. A devoted caregiver in the house. You've seen this shape before, and you're bracing for the obvious turn. But what actually happened in that house over the next several months was stranger, slower, and far more dangerous to Vanessa than any affair could have been. Because while she was busy building a new life with Prestondale, Elias Grant was quietly, secretly, building himself a new body. Josie had trained in rehabilitative care before she ever became a home aide, and something about Elias's charts had bothered her from the very first week. His injury was severe, but not, according to his original discharge notes, absolutely, permanently complete. The surgeons had used careful words. Unlikely, not expected to, low probability, not impossible. She started, quietly, doing more than her job required. Daily stretching, range of motion work, massage therapy she'd learned years earlier and never had reason to use to its full extent. She didn't tell Elias what she suspected, not at first. She didn't want to hand him hope that might collapse on him the way his own wife already had. Around the 4-month mark, something changed in his legs. A flicker. A twitch he wasn't sure was real until it happened twice, then 3 times. He asked Josie to keep it between them. There were close calls. Twice. Vanessa came home unannounced. Once to grab a forgotten charger, once, tellingly, to grab a piece of mail from an attorney about refinancing the house, without telling Elias. Both times, Josie had less than a minute of warning. Both times, Elias was back in his chair, breath still uneven from effort, before his wife walked through the door. Vanessa never noticed. She was too busy scrolling through a message from Preston, already halfway back out to her car. One afternoon in month 5, after dropping the kids at school, Josie came back into the house and found Elias standing upright in the middle of the living room. One hand braced white-knuckled on the back of a chair, sweat on his brow, legs trembling under weight they hadn't held in over 2 years. She let out a sound halfway between a gasp and a sob before she could stop herself. He grinned at her, shaking, and told her, quietly, urgently, "Not yet. Not yet." Because Elias Grant had already started to understand something about his wife that he hadn't let himself admit out loud. If Vanessa found out he was walking again before he was ready to use that fact, she would come back, not for him, but for what he represented. A functioning husband, a financial partner, a story she could return to on her own terms, whenever it suited her. He wasn't going to give her that chance. Weeks passed. Elias's steps grew steadier. He asked Josie to help him practice in the early mornings, before the kids woke and long before there was any chance of Vanessa appearing. One morning, Josie walked into the kitchen and found him standing at the stove, spatula in hand, flipping eggs for Micah and Skylar on legs that 3 separate specialists had told him would never carry his weight again. She didn't hold back the tears this time. He turned, steadied himself on the counter, and told her the truth he'd been circling for weeks, that he wasn't only fighting to walk. He was fighting to become a man worth being married to again. And somewhere in the last year, without either of them quite naming it, he'd started hoping that man might get to build a life with her instead. Meanwhile, Vanessa had all but stopped pretending. She was staying at Preston's apartment most nights, showing up at the house less and less, calling it freedom, calling it something she'd earned, calling it anything except what her own children were quietly starting to feel it as, abandonment. Micah, 8 now and old enough to notice, asked Josie one night at bedtime why his mom didn't tuck him in anymore. Josie didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt him, so she told him the only true thing she had, that some people need time to find their way back to the people who love them, and until they do, someone has to stay. She meant it as comfort. She didn't yet know she was describing her own future. By the time Elias could walk the length of the house unaided, he had also quietly done something else Vanessa knew nothing about. He'd met with a family attorney of his own, reviewed the finances Vanessa had been rearranging without his knowledge, and begun, carefully, legally, without a single dramatic confrontation, to protect his children's future from a mother who was actively spending herself out of their lives. He wasn't just learning to stand. He was learning to stand without her ever again being able to knock him down. Vanessa's new life with Prestondale looked, from the outside, exactly like the freedom she'd been chasing. It felt, from the inside, like something closer to freefall. Preston was charming in the way men are charming when they've never had to be responsible for anything. He drank more than she'd noticed in college. He borrowed money he was slow to return. When Vanessa brought up moving in together permanently, he changed the subject in a way she chose, for a long time, not to examine too closely. One night, out drinking with friends Vanessa had never met, Preston fell down a flight of stairs outside an apartment that turned out not to be his. He didn't get back up. He was pronounced dead before Vanessa even made it to the hospital. His family arrived within days. People who had never heard of Vanessa, who took one look at the woman sleeping in Preston's bed and living, in part, off whatever he'd had left, and made it clear within the week that she wasn't welcome to stay. She was given 72 hours to find somewhere else to be. She had nowhere to go. She hadn't spoken to Elias in months. She hadn't seen her children in almost as long. She drove, because she genuinely couldn't think of anywhere else, back toward the house she used to call home. The porch light was off. A car she didn't recognize sat in the driveway where the Denali used to be. A neighbor she vaguely remembered told her, gently but plainly, that Elias had moved, out of state, in fact, with his wife and the 2 children, some months back now. His wife. Vanessa stood on a sidewalk that used to be hers, and for the first time in over a year, allowed herself to fully understand what she had actually done. She found Elias's number through a mutual friend who clearly didn't want to give it to her. Her hands were shaking when she dialed. He picked up on the third ring. She doesn't remember, later, exactly what she said, something about being sorry, Something about wanting to talk, wanting to see Micah and Skylar, wanting anything at all that resembled a door left open even a crack. What she remembers, word for word, for the rest of her life, is what came back on the other end of the line. Calm, not cruel. Simply, finally done. I don't have anything left to say to you, Vanessa. The call ended. And this time, there was no coming back from the silence that followed it. Vanessa Grant once had a husband who used to get her coffee before sunrise just so she wouldn't start her day empty-handed. She traded him, slowly, for a man who couldn't even manage to stay upright at the bottom of a staircase. And in doing so, she handed her entire life to a stranger she hired to give baths and manage medication. That stranger, quiet, careful, never asking for any of it, ended up with the husband who learned to walk again, the children who call her the mother who stayed, and a life across state lines that Vanessa will spend the rest of hers only ever hearing about secondhand. Elias Grant didn't win because he learned to walk. He won because, somewhere in that long silent year, he learned exactly who had actually been standing beside him the whole time, and he never let go of her again. Some people spend years searching for freedom. Vanessa found hers. She just never noticed, until it was far too late, that it cost her everything worth having.